Hello and welcome to the first of our new Maths and English regular update sessions. We'll be here each month for about half an hour to share a few insights, update you and usually answer a few questions as well.
The former will be similar to the Fun Skills 2019 webinars we ran last year as part of the countdown to the launch of the reformed functional skills qualifications. Although we're aiming to be a bit more focused and take up a bit less of your time, we'll also not just be talking about functional skills, as this session will show.
This is the start of a new series, although hopefully you might have had a chance to look at the two pre-webinar sessions we recorded recently. You can find these on our Maths and English Resource Hub, along with the recording of this session once it has been uploaded.
The Resource Hub is something we'll be talking about quite a lot during these sessions. It's designed to help practitioners and managers find their way around City and Guilds Maths and English offer, understand the full extent of what's available and how to make best use of it. It's also where you'll find details of how to sign up for these webinars and where you'll be able to access recordings of the back catalogue.
As well as bookmarking the Resource Hub, please also ensure that you sign up for our email updates. You can do this by clicking on the link that appears at the bottom of every City and Guilds webpage under Tools and Support. You will then receive an email which invites you to choose your preferences from a list of topics, including functional skills.
But some things don't change, even if we've got ourselves a new set of mugshots. Your three regular hosts will be myself, Paul Seeney, along with Amanda Kelly.
Hello.
And Catherine Cooper.
Hello.
I possibly have the most cryptic job title in the world, Industry Manager, but in essence I look after City and Guilds' range of qualifications and other products and services within the whole arena of maths, English, ESOL and employability.
Meanwhile, Paul and I are what's known as technical advisors. We work directly with practitioners and managers delivering maths and English in their various forms with City and Guilds, sharing insights and helping to keep both yourselves and internal colleagues up to date.
We've also got a new hashtag to go with this new series, because Fun Skills was so 2019. It's now CG Maths English if you want to track our musings on social media.
This is something we'll include every month, a quick dive into anything important that's happened or happening in our world.
Firstly, we're continuing to add more documents to the Functional Skills qualification page. This includes guidance for delivery documents covering all the externally marked exams, as well as more sample exam papers.
Catherine and I are still travelling the country hosting regular Maths and English Network meetings. These have inevitably focused on the reformed functional skills qualifications so far, although we will be continuing to add more dates and venues as we arrange them.
And we've refreshed our digital learning resources. There's a much improved bank of maths and English resources on our smart screen platform, as well as an updated, reloaded version of eFunctional Skills. You can find more information about both of these on the Resource Hub.
So, on to this month's topic. I do remember quite a few years ago a colleague telling me that funding is a bit like the Schleswig-Holstein question. Only 3 people understand it. One's dead, one's mad, and the other's forgotten. But when it comes to maths and English, there are some quite specific things to bear in mind, as well as some important differences between 16 to 18, adult provision, and apprenticeships. We're not planning to say too much about apprenticeships during this session, although I will be making an appearance during a separate webinar later this month, organised by our apprenticeships team, where this will, I'm sure, come up.
The other point, just to be clear, is that this information only relates to England. We're going to be covering funding rules and arrangements within the ESFA remit. This is important to bear in mind if you're located in any of the areas with a mayoral combined authority. They have now the responsibility for adult education funding, although in practice they're continuing to largely follow the ESFA's adult education budget rules and funding methodology, at least for now.
So here's where you can find everything you need to know, at least for study programmes and adult education. These 2 documents take you through the key guiding principles that apply in each case, as well as listing every single City and Girls Maths English ESOL qualification and unit that's eligible for use and or able to be funded. They're both quite detailed documents, so we'll deal with each in turn.
Okay, let's start with 16 plus and the notorious condition of funding rules that have applied to study programmes over the last few years. Even though these have been around for a while, I still come across quite a few instances of them being misunderstood or overinterpreted. I think the first thing to reiterate risks stating the obvious, but fundamentally this is about the composition of learners' programmes, what they're timetabled to study, rather than necessarily what exams they sit. The rules also vary slightly between part-time and full-time learners, and it doesn't formally apply to anyone studying less than 150 hours in a year. The consequences of not meeting the condition are pretty severe for the provider. For anyone not meeting the condition of funding, they effectively forfeit all of that learner's entitlement to public funding. It doesn't happen immediately. Clawback happens in the next but 1 year, but there is and there's also a tolerance that allows up to 5% of a provider's learners to be non-compliant with the condition of funding before they start to suffer any financial penalty.
However, the counter to this, it's not that difficult to meet with the formal requirements of the condition of funding, as long as learners are timetabled for maths and English lessons over at least 6 weeks of the programme duration is more than 26 weeks, and a relevant qualification aim that counts towards a condition is recorded on the ILR. Then technically that's job done, the condition has been met. Now, of course, that's ignoring the point that providers are also judged on learners' attainment and progression. There's understandable nervousness about learners enrolling for qualifications that they do not ultimately achieve. However, the other point that often gets forgotten is learners aren't forbidden from working towards and achieving other maths and English qualifications, besides those that count directly towards a condition. Yes, they need to be on a path towards one of the qualifications the DfE has recognised for this specific purpose, but equally they need to be supported adequately to make meaningful progress, and increasingly colleagues from Ofsted want to know about the latter.
In practice, this opens the door to bite-sized qualifications such as our English skills and mathematics skills qualifications being part of the mix. They need to be used judiciously to support meaningful progress for particular individuals or cohorts, rather than a sheep dip for all. But please don't be swayed by them not directly counting towards the condition of funding and thinking that they are not allowed to be used. There is absolutely no reason why a learner couldn't be enrolled to work towards a functional skills English qualification, as well as accessing some of English skills single units and or themed awards during the same year. Including the former on the ILR enables the condition to be met, whereas the latter can support learners overcome any specific gaps in their knowledge or confidence that might be impeding their progress towards that goal. In-year achievements are also helpful bulwark against dropouts, and invariably an achievement is better than no achievement.
Quite a lot there, I know, but a couple of other points just before we move on. It's sometimes forgotten that ESOL Skills for Life qualifications are also on the DfE's approved list when it comes to the condition of funding for English, although unlike GCSE or Level 2 functional skills, they can't be treated as a destination. And finally, having talked about English mathematics skills as a vehicle for supporting progress without counting directly towards the condition, it is worth noting that some of the entry-level qualifications within this suite do count directly towards the condition of funding. Basically, anything at entry level that's bigger than 45 guided learning hours has been accepted. So that includes all of the themed awards for English and about half of them for maths.
Quite a lot of detail there to take in. There are a couple of significant changes for this year. Both of these coincided with the functional skills reforms, but the impact of which have not necessarily been felt yet. The first is the change to the condition of funding rules for full-time learners who have a GCSE at grade 2 or lower, or no GCSE at all. Previously, these learners were always expected to continue studying maths and English until they had achieved at least a GCSE grade 4. But now they have the option of continuing until they achieve a level 2 functional skill, and that is now being accepted as their destination.
Unfortunately, this new rule doesn't include full-time learners who've already got GCSE at grade 3. They are still expected to continue working towards GCSE. Nevertheless, it does allow providers and learners a little bit more room for manoeuvre than previously, as well as giving functional skills a bit of a boost to its status. For this purpose, again, just to be clear, full-time means at least 540 hours for 16 to 17-year-olds or 450 hours if over 18.
And the other game changer here is the new tariff of Maths and English progress point scores that providers will in future be judged against. The old rules, as you can see from this chart, were very heavily biased towards GCSE and particularly unfair on entry-level learners. Since moving from entry 1 to entry 3 was seen as zero progress as far as these old scores were concerned. Thankfully, the new point system is a bit fairer, even if it still stops short of giving functional skills fully parity with GCSE.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to 19 plus learners being funded through the adult education budget. As we mentioned earlier on, 7 areas of England, Greater London and 6 of the new mayoral combined authorities now have their own devolved adult education budget. Providers in those areas draw their funding from the Mayor's office rather than the ESFA, although in practice each of these authorities are pretty much following the ESFA's funding rules and rates, at least for the time being.
Full funding for adult literacy and numeracy provision has been in place for nearly 20 years. The pot is a lot smaller these days than it was during the heyday of Skills for Life, but nevertheless learners without GCSE at grade 4 or C are entitled to full funding.
There is a completely separate pot of money for maths and English provision within apprenticeships, as well as other mechanisms such as, for now, the European Social Fund. Here we're talking specifically about the adult education budget.
There are 3 broad categories of maths and English qualification that are eligible for funding under the AEB. Broadly, GCSE, functional skills and so-called stepping stone qualifications. Now, I'm not a fan of the term stepping stone, especially as it's also used in a slightly different context when talking about the condition of funding rules for study programmes. Nevertheless, it's the term that ESFA currently uses when talking about this category. This category, however, does include the various bite-sized maths and English qualifications, 3847 and 3844, that we've offered in the last few years, although as you can see from this slide, there are some quite tight constraints on the range of qualifications that have been included within the legal entitlement.
It's worth pointing out that both 3847 and 3844 predated these rules. At the time they were launched, both suites had blanket funding eligibility. We did plead the case for level 2 with the SFA, as it was still then, when they started tightening the screws, though sadly this was to no avail. However, before we get too despondent, there's a big but coming.
Now, this is the AEB's hidden gem. It's buried quite deeply in the ESFA's funding rules document, and it's definitely not shouted about, although it's really helpful as a workaround for the constraints on qualification funding that I was talking about a moment ago. Let's take the certificate in English skills at level 1. Because that includes all of the because the English skills, I'll start that sentence again, because the certificate in English skills at level 1 includes all of the English units at level 1 within its rules of combination, and because the certificate sized qualification is big enough to appear on the legal entitlement, each of these units are fundable aims in their own right.
Each unit within the certificate sized qualification can be funded in its own right. In order to do that, the relevant unit aim must be recorded, the recorded learning aim. To help simplify this, we've included a complete list of the eligible units from 3847 with links to their listing on the hub within our Adult Funding Guide document. Using the example given here for reading words, signs and symbols at entry 1, The correct aim to use for funding purposes would be L/504/4991. Don't use the single unit qualification number 600/7500/4.
That said, when it comes to registering learners on our systems, you can use whichever POS number is most cost effective for the situation. For example, 384701 has no upfront registration fee and simply charges per unit achieved, whereas 384702 has quite a hefty upfront fee, since it assumes candidates are intending to work towards their way through the entire certificate.
So in a nutshell, and I'll say this quite carefully, learners are eligible for certification in respect of any qualification contained within the POS for which they have been registered, provided they've met the rules of combination for that qualification.
And at that point I'll chip in to say that units are funded according to their size. This dates back to when QCF still existed, so credit remains the currency here, and each credit worth £50, a 2-credit unit is therefore funded at £100. And it's also worth mentioning that there are a couple of quirks. For reasons that we've yet to fathom, a couple of these units from English skills weren't included, although the good news is most have.
And anyone thinking this might be a ruse for accessing Level 2 units, given that the Level 1 certificate also includes units at Entry 3 and Level 2, think again. They have been there in previous years, but the ESFA has now closed that loophole. One more area to cover: adult funding for ESOL qualifications. The first thing to say is that ESOL qualifications, unlike maths and their English counterparts for first language speakers, are not fully funded. They were for a short time during the Skills for Life years, but now learners have to be either unemployed or eligible for active benefits, or if they are in work, they must be earning less than £16,009.50. Don't forget that 50p. Otherwise, learners are expected to pay course fees.
ESOL Skills for Life is the only significant type of ESOL qualification that's eligible for public funding in England. They're derived from the adult literacy standards and aligned to the adult ESOL core curriculum, so very much geared towards learners settled permanently in the UK rather than international students. These qualifications were last revamped just over 5 years ago, principally to allow each other linguistic mode to be recognised and funded as a qualification in its own right.
There is one silver lining when it comes to the funding arrangements for ESOL, again dating from when these qualifications were last revamped in 2014. Normally, when a qualification is funded under the AEB, it has a specified funding rate based on its size. There are usually some minor adjustments for other factors such as economic disadvantage, but basically the funding rate is what it is. The difference with ESOL qualifications is it's possible to claim extra funding if the provider needs to use more hours than the funding rate assumes. It's not a blank cheque, since providers' overall funding allocation isn't increased as a result. So if you fund one group of learners more generously, it might mean there's less money available to fund as many groups or as many learners overall. But what it does do is potentially help providers out of a tight spot and go some way towards acknowledging the huge range of ESOL cohorts and delivery settings. The top-up rules are, to quote Nick Linford, quite complicated, but they are set out in full within the ESFA funding rates and formula document for the AEB.
Which brings us to the close of this session.